My name is Christina Kovacs, and this is The Chaos Inside. Okay, we have Andrea Haupert with us today, who was incarcerated at the Indiana Women's Prison during the time of COVID, and she's going to share with us what her experience was like. So, hi, Andrea. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, of course.
Thank you. So, why don't you start with telling us a little bit about what it was like when COVID first, when everybody started talking about it, when COVID first hit?
Okay, so there was maybe it was a very short amount of time where we first heard about COVID to things started happening. It was maybe a week or two at the absolute most. And then one night at shift change, which is at 5:45 before 6 o'clock count, we all had to go to our rooms and lock down, which we were under the impression that it was because of shift change and count, normal everyday procedure. Well, then we weren't allowed out. And from that point on, we were locked down for 2.5 months.
Wow.
And they didn't really respond well. They didn't tell us what was going on, how long we were going to be locked down. We weren't allowed to use our tablets and call our families. And they weren't letting us out to go to the bathroom.
So let me back you up real quick for people that don't know. Well, first of all, what unit did you live on while this was all going on?
I lived on Building 8, Unit 12.
Okay. So you actually lived on the newer building versus the cottages, the older building, which is what we ran the campaign for.
Yeah.
So you lived on Building 8. So what does lockdown look like? And hang on, before we go there, you used to live on Building 7, Cottage 7, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what living on a cottage is like and what living on the newer building is like.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is lockdown?
So typically there's a control center in the middle and there's all these units around that. So then they can buzz you in and out of your room by a button. But the procedure before that was that we were allowed to prop our doors and just keep them open and come and go as we wish, except for at count times and then at lights out in the nighttime till 5 a.m. So then they decided that we weren't allowed to prop our doors. This was a week before COVID hit and all this stuff started happening. So now we're being wrote up on Class B conduct reports for leaving your door propped because now all of a sudden today it's not okay.
So I want you to kind of explain what a Class B looks like, because a lot of people don't understand what a Class B write-up. So first of all, a Class B write-up could be violence, right? Like getting into a fight, or it could be a girlfriend interaction, or it can be propping your door open, right?
Which was totally acceptable, and they made the props for our doors and gave them to us the day before. So the severity of it, when you look at it from a judge or a prosecutor standpoint, is completely detrimental. Yeah. When you look at what it takes to catch a Class B write-up, is very silly.
And what are the consequences if you go to Class B?
So you could go to lock, you lose time. You're out of a program for 6 months. You'll lose your program if you're currently in one. You lose programming for 6 months. You can lose your good time. It can also drop your credit class down, which means if you're under the old law, it used to be 2 for 1, whereas it can make you 1 for 1 or one for, what was the other? Or 3 for 1.
3 for 1.
Yeah. Your visits could be interrupted.
Yeah. They put you on lockdown. And so for those that don't know, what did your cell consist of?
Okay, so just me and one bunkie. And it's a steel door. It's locked, and I have to be buzzed in or out. You have a call button in your room, but they were never answering it, ever. So, there's just me and my bunkie, and we're just locked in there. They're not telling us anything. We're not able to call our families. It created hysteria because people didn't know what was going on. Right. And, some people aren't able to adapt to things like that. Mental health issues and other issues, they have things going on at home. Like, what if they had a court call or something scheduled with their kids? Or now we're just like in the dark, have no idea. You can't get out to use the restroom. You don't know when you're going to eat. Heaven forbid you didn't have commissary already in your tote, because nobody knew. Well, we didn't know that this was happening. We couldn't have planned for that.
Did they do commissary as well?
No, they did continue our commissary. The amount that you could order did lower because staff and caseworkers were the ones having to distribute it.
Really?
So they did change the format a little bit to accommodate those who were distributing it, because it's heavy, it's a lot. So, so they were allowing commissary to come in. They were allowing, so we're on complete lockdown. Nobody's saying nothing. To keep, then we find out later it's like COVID and social distancing, and like, so nobody's cross-contaminating and infecting somebody else. Like, it's totally being said, it's like for stopping the spread, right? Mm-hmm. So they're allowing kitchen workers from all different dorms, though, to go work in the kitchen.
So they can utilize the people that are incarcerated there to continue to run the facility. But you guys have to remain locked in your room,
locked down
all time. So, and also with them going to work in the kitchen, they're having access to people from the outside too. They could potentially be exposed.
Right. So it was like, we're on lockdown, and everybody's hysterical, everybody's upset, including staff, because now officers have to open doors. They have to hear us screaming and yelling because people want answers. They want to know why they can't call their family. They want to know why they can't use the restroom. Using the restroom is not a privilege, it's a right.
Right.
And they want to know, they want answers, and rightfully so. But so now the staff's upset. We're upset. We're on complete lockdown. And clearly it wasn't convenient for them to have to feed the whole prison, and for the administrators to figure it out and go by like these practices that they said were to help us not spread. So they broke them as it was conveniently working for them. But also at the same time, that's so dangerous if you're really wanting us to be locked down to stop the spread of COVID, because you're just putting everybody at risk. You're cross-contaminating everybody.
Right. God, that's so sad. I can't even imagine being in there during that.
It was, honestly, Christina, it was the hardest 6 months of my entire 7 years incarcerated.
Wow.
Hands down, the worst, hardest time.
So, Andrea, I know that you weren't living on a cottage at the time that COVID hit, but you lived on 7 for umpteen years. How long did you live on 7?
I lived on 7 for 2 years. I lived on cottage 2 for a year. I've also lived on 4 and 3. So I've lived on a lot of cottages.
You actually lived more on cottages than you did on the big building then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So then kind of talk us through what it's like when you're living on a cottage during either the winter, primarily the summer, but the winter is bad too.
Yeah.
So just kind of tell like what that's like and what being locked down on a cottage meant then.
Okay. So on a cottage, we'll just pick dorm 4, for example. They're a larger dorm, so you would either have 2 other bunkies or 3 other bunkies. So you're really crammed in there, and
a cell that was originally built for 1 person.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or 2 at the absolute most, like absolute most.
Right.
And you got to think about, you have the bunk beds, you have us as human beings, and just our stuff that we have to live, it's a lot. Yeah. So these cottage rooms, they have a door that locks. They have a window that may or not even be there still, so in the wintertime, it's really cold and you're subject to like crazy low temperatures because the heat's not right. There's no window, snow is coming in, ice is coming in, or in the summer, it poses a problem because there's 1 plug-in for 4 people, That's not, you could plug 5 fans in there and it still wouldn't be enough.
And this is with the doors open in previous summer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So correct. So when COVID hit, and like I said previously, they started doing this where you can't have your doors propped or open when I lived on the big building about a week before COVID hit. At that same time, they implemented the policy of the doors on the cottages also needed to remain closed. During my previous years of incarceration, they would do this like in the winter. So like at a certain time at night, the doors needed to be closed, like after 9:30 count or whatever. But then you could just open them as you wish. And it was really like the officer's discretion. But then once it got so hot, they were permitted to have the doors open. Well, it kind of goes in waves. Like it's like every year you revisit the issue. They try to pull this. Yeah. We push back and then it's taken care of. So now though, with the new major and deputy warden, now the doors have to be locked. And
being locked, I think we just have to point out the fact that these are manually locked doors. It's not like a big building where you push a button. And I mean, you can push a button and open a singular door on the big building, or you can push another button and unlock all of the doors. But correct. On the cottages, an officer has to manually lock and unlock these doors. And these are doors that are just steel metal doors that have no kind of airflow, right?
None. And that's right. There's no operating system on the cottages because they're so old. So it is all manual, every single door. And if I remember correctly, there's 10 rooms down the left hall and 12 rooms down the right hall, and these people come to work there for a job and a paycheck and a way to support their children. Not necessarily that they care, so at what point in time is their job more important? Say there was a fire that broke out. At what point in time are these people going to be like, yeah, I'm totally going to risk my life and make sure all these offenders get out?
Right.
Nobody is going to do that. They're thinking about their home.
Right. Absolutely. And I just want to piggyback on what you're saying about a fire breaking out. There's no sprinkler systems in there.
None.
There is no kind of, it would be devastating because, and it's funny because when we were running this campaign, I lived on dorm 6 in 2014, and a fire broke out then. One of the industrial fans in the hallway had caught on fire. She woke up to the smell and started getting everybody awake, and come to find out the officer's at the desk asleep. And yep. So, I mean, if it weren't for the doors being open then, God, I can only imagine what would have happened, You
wouldn't have been able to tell.
Right. And so like, at the end of the hall, like you said, there's 10 on one hall, 10 on the other, or 12 on the other, I apologize. And so if you're banging on a door with one of those industrial fans on that are usually broken or
extremely loud,
that the officer wouldn't even be able to hear you banging on the door. It scared me to death to think that they were being locked in there and that industrial fans going on. And I also was told by people that were still in there that the big fans that they put at the ends of the hallways, mm-hmm. that the officers were using those because it was so daggone hot in these cottages. And so, if you have that big fan on the officer and then you have that industrial fan on and a fire catches, are you going to hear anybody banging down that hallway? And you're just not going to. And it was really scary to think that you guys were living in those kind of conditions. Like, cruel and unusual punishment to the max, right? Like absolutely and utterly deplorable. And I think that it's important to point out, like, Andrea, you were in there for a life sentence, and right. so I think it's so dehumanizing the way that they went about things, the way that they treat people in there anyways, but especially the way that they dealt with COVID.
And then they piggybacked off of COVID, like to implement stricter lockdown procedures, and I understand that Indiana Women's Prison is considered a maximum security prison. It's never been ran like that, because when I think about a maximum security men's prison and the issues that they face and why they implement the policies that they have, is because they need to. They have gangs, they have drugs, they have violence, they have all these things that Indiana Women's Prison doesn't really have, like, I'm not saying there wouldn't be drugs here or there, or a cell phone or some little two girls fighting. It wasn't even a bad fight. Nobody had to go to the hospital. You know, it's really elementary when compared. And my brother, he's in Michigan City, and I just hear the stories. And so it was like, I'm in a college camp with the irritations of prison structure. But at the same time, like the way that people were treated, because now it's because of COVID, you know, so however they treated us, now it was because it was our safety from COVID. They're trying to protect us. No, you weren't trying to protect us when you let all these different kitchen workers from all these dorms be together. You're trying to protect us as it's convenience to you. It's never about, hey, I know these people are offenders, but they're human beings.
Right.
We've totally, even as a society, and especially in the prison system, when the prison system became an enterprise and mass incarceration took off and became this huge business for
the leading business in the country.
Absolutely. We really lost our compassion in the fact of society. Like, we're supposed to be encouraging our weakest links and building people up, not just throwing them away and treating them worse than you would treat a stray cat. And really, that's what's happening.
And I totally agree with you. And even the term offenders is something that just irks my soul, because I'm not an offender, right? Like, I had did. That doesn't mean I continuously offend over and over and over again. So first of all, that's a label that they're putting on them anyways.
Yes.
But I do totally agree with you, because now we have such a punitive justice system that we're sending you away because we're mad at you, not even because we're scared of you as society, right? Like, it's now become like and it's not representing what it is originally designed for. And like you said, one of the leading industries in the country, especially, you know, like incorporating the privatized prisons into it as well. And
huge.
And you know, we could just, maybe we'll do another episode with talking about like all the different forms and fashions of punishment that somebody goes through once that judge initiates that sentence. Once it's
for sure,
they're told that they have an executed sentence. That's only the very beginning of it, right? Like, and
that's the minute part.
Exactly. Yeah. So go ahead.
Okay, so they decided that now we're going to blame everything on COVID, you know, and I understand that the DOC released a statement, and I found out this afterwards. I was still currently incarcerated when you guys were running your campaign, and I did see you on the news, because so then we started moving into like these phases about trying to like reopen things and social distancing. So then they started letting us go to the chow hall to eat, because now it's even more of a convenience. Now they're not spending as much money having to feed the whole prison and deliver it and all of that. So now we're able to go to the chow hall, but that's it. You know, we're still not having rec at this point. Day room time is maybe 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what side of the dorm you lived on. And then it became where that's now going to be the new normal. Like, this side of the dorm on this bracket can be out for 2 hours during this time. The other side of the dorm only can be out for 2 hours during this time. And then it poses the question, like, what about my laundry? What about showering? You have 60 women in a dorm. We can't, even just the one side, do laundry in 2 hours with 2 washers and 2 dryers. It's not realistic. But you guys are putting these things in place because you're so bent on making this a maximum security prison with all these stipulations, but also you're labeling it as COVID prevention and COVID, you know, awareness, that it just doesn't even make sense. So then your staff is so angry because you have to make them work so much harder, and they have to deal with these people that are angry. We were angry, and we were mad and very upset. So when the staff is under that pressure, you know as well as I do, it rolls onto us, and it only creates conflict and terrible vibes in the dorms. And it was just, it's complete chaos at all times. Like, for a while, I was trying to complete my 2 college classes, and all day long, people were locked in their rooms. They're kicking their door. They're screaming. They're yelling at officers. Officers are yelling back. Then they come in, and I lived towards the end of Unit 12. They would come in. They would unlock like the first 6 doors and let the group room out, who's not locked in at all during this time. Their group room door is never locked. by the way. And then they give up. So they go out. So now I'm still waiting to use the restroom for 3.5 hours. And here comes the next officer. She goes to the same 6 doors. She's trying to make her way down the dorm as well. Doesn't get to my thing. So here I am starting this process time and time and time again, just trying to use the restroom. It's so frustrating.
Okay. And I know that this can even be embarrassing, but when I was there and we went through periods of lockdown and they wouldn't allow people out to use the restroom, then if you went and something else because you couldn't hold it any longer, I mean, like to the point where you're in so much pain you have tears in your eyes. Okay, so
yeah, I called my grandma crying.
It's not just I have to go to the bathroom, it's like, I mean, it is taking an emotional toll on you. Like it's a form of torture. That's what it really is. But if you were to go and something else, like if you were to urinate in a cup or a bag, again, that would be a Class B write-up. Were they threatening you guys with that still?
Yeah. Yeah. But then some of the officers, the sergeants mainly, but a lot of the officers, they weren't threatening us because you know what? If you had to pee in a cup or a bag, then they wouldn't have to hear you.
Oh my gosh.
And they don't want to come around and unlock those doors all the time. Like they weren't, it was just crazy the way that they were treating people. And then their staff, they were really angry too, because as well as I do, they don't have to work hard like that there.
Right.
Come and go, move as we want,
Right.
So I think that
shifts are normally boring, right? Like, yes, I mean, really, what it consists of, the night shift is completely dead, but the day shift, I mean, it consists of unlocking, well, on the big building, pushing a button, but on the other ones, I mean, on the big building, they'd occasionally do a walk on the unit, but the cottages, it would consist of just getting up and going and unlocking the door to let people out and in, and that was
for movement.
Right. Correct. And so you hit on a point that I was hoping you did about them trying to run it and structure it like a men's facility. And so I think it's important to note that the new deputy warden, and was it the captain?
It's the major.
The major. Okay. They both transferred from a men's facilities. And so now they're trying to operate and structure the Indiana Women's Prison as if it's a man's facility. And there's so many differences in men and women, not just the violence, but the way that the prison is structured and built, right? B, the different needs that women have. But see, like the part that they're blaming it on COVID. So how much COVID testing was being conducted while you were in there?
So if somebody was had a fever or didn't feel well, they would take them to the infirmary. And then if they had a fever, supposedly they would test them for COVID, but then they would go to lock for segregation. So it was kind of like a mix of what would happen. So then they cleared all of Unit 1, the Grace Unit, out, and then they were putting people over there that were sick, that didn't feel well. So whether they had COVID or not, if you had any signs or symptoms, they were putting you over there and isolating you. Then at one point in time, then they were in the gym, sleeping on the floor in the gym. So then if you were sick, I knew 3 people offhand that actually went to SEG, and they handcuffed them and walked them back there. So their procedure, I promise, they didn't have like a set procedure. It was changing, and I think it was because they didn't know what to do, but it never made sense, It never made sense. So then our girl on the dorm that I lived on, her bunkie had a fever. She was sick. She reported it. So she got taken out and taken to lock, okay? So then her bunkie, though, is left there to clean up the room by herself, to sanitize the room by herself, and they were giving us bleach and spray bottles at this time. Then her bunkie was
up, right?
her bunkie was quarantined for 14 days. All the while, this girl's test comes back fine. She's better. They put her back in the same room. She's not quarantined, but her bunkie still is.
You're kidding me.
Promise.
So how much? Okay, so first of all, I think that there's an issue that if if the bunkie was showing symptoms, why the other person didn't get tested, right? Like, okay,
Right.
maybe the results came back as though it was negative, but you don't know that going in, right? And so I understand kind of like taking the procedures to keep the other one away from people until the tests come back, but not only the bunkie, but the other people in the dorm should have been tested, in my opinion, right? Like the whole unit should have been tested, and that's at the very minimum.
Well, and then
Go ahead.
when you think about that, and then they're not making sure it's sanitized. That's not the bunkie's job to do that. And the bunkie could have gotten it first, because you can have it and not show signs or symptoms,
Right.
So she could have gotten that, but the fact that they didn't even test her, they were come around to do temperature checks, kind of, like it wasn't really like a strict procedure how it should be. But all the while, commissary workers are leaving the unit. Kitchen workers are leaving the unit. The officers that work our unit had PPE on, but it was just like one little thing, and they would go from this dorm to that dorm because they were so short-staffed during COVID. They're already really short-staffed a lot of times, and then they're even shorter staffed during COVID. So at the same time, there's still so much cross-contamination that even locking the bunkie down for 14 days, you didn't test her, you didn't come in and clean it. And as an institution, that's their job.
Right.
And even when
but the reality of it is that they don't run the institution. The inmates do, right? Like they're the ones who make it function and they make it operate, but you have the oversight of the staff, right? Like,
correct.
But yeah. I do agree with you that that's not our job to do, right? Like,
right.
At all.
And it's not our job to run the prison, but that's,
right.
And I know that that's how it's been for years. And it's kind of been relaxed because Indiana Women's Prison has a college campus feel, because they do offer programming in college and college courses and pre-college and all this stuff. But at the same time, I think that staff and even administration they're okay with it because it makes their job so much easier. And so either you're getting paid to work harder or you're getting paid to not work, so it's just been acceptable this whole time. Right. And then when the hazmat team would come in, which happened 2 or 3 times, we were still locked down at this point. They would come in fully in hazmat gear, fully suited. They would spray like the bathroom and the day room areas down with bleach, but then they would only spray the individual cell floors and mop the floor. And I, for the life of me, could never figure out, what's the floor got to do with it? Right. I mean, that's the last place I touch is the floor. Right. What about everything else? Like the phone, just anything. Like the group room one time was quarantined because one of their bunkies had been taken out. So they're quarantined. However, all that meant was that they had to use the bathroom and all of us remained locked down while they went to the bathroom. And of course, you're supposed to clean the bathroom with bleach afterwards, but that never happened. They were still dipping in the same ice chest we were in. And as a matter of fact, the officer one time took them the ice chest to their door. And I was like, that room is quarantined. Do you not understand what that means? Like, so it was like redundant for no reason. Like we weren't reaching the goal to be safer and not spread COVID. Right. All we were doing is implementing things that made everybody's life harder and more stressful than it ever needed to be.
So how was word traveling during lockdown? Was it, because we both know, and it's called offender.com, right? That, right. If something happens during count, by the end of count, the whole campus has done heard about it, right? So it travels fast.
Yes. How
was word traveling during COVID?
So staff would tell us, because it just got to the point where like a normal day previous to COVID, staff gossips too. They have their favorite stuff they gossip too. So, but at the same time, like during COVID, a lot of staff that normally wouldn't say anything to you about stuff like that were, because they started to feel bad that the way we were being treated and that people weren't telling us. And I think that also it sparked a little bit of fear in them because the whole nation didn't really know how to deal with COVID. So
Right.
everybody was scared. So it kind of brought that compassion out in them where they thought, hey, I'm scared too. And I can only imagine how an offender's scared. Like we really need to help them. And a lot of staff did come around like that. They were, but they weren't willing. It's too much when you have 25 women screaming and kicking their doors because they want to go out to the bathroom and they're working 4 units at the same time. Like, that's a lot for anybody to handle. So, and they just don't get paid to deal with it. So they just don't deal with it. They just say, screw it, you know?
Right. So, going back to the cottages, and I know that you didn't live on there during COVID, but were you guys hearing about, like, I mean, because we were told of people passing out from heat exhaustion, getting sick, like physically throwing up. I mean, it was absolutely horrific because, again, on the cottages, they're locked in on their building with these manual lock and unlocks. And no, I don't even think that we mentioned the fact that there's absolutely no air conditioning. You're lucky to get heat in the winter. But the
no
cottages only offer, I'm sorry.
There's no sergeant. There's just your one officer. You don't have, if that officer just sits there and ignores you, you don't have anybody else to help you.
Right.
On the big building, usually there's like a couple officers, caseworkers, or a sergeant, or even lieutenant over the zoning area.
Yeah.
The cottages, you know, they're pretty isolated with one officer.
Yep. So, were you hearing of the medical incidences that were taking place?
At first we were not because we were all so secluded, but like the kitchen workers, they would know about stuff like that. And then that's how we were getting information that really what was happening on other dorms and, you know, what other staff members said. So like our kitchen workers would come back and they would tell us like, so-and-so passed out today, you know, because it's hot.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking, I mean, when we're hitting, you know, 98, 99 degrees with a high humidity, right? Like in the cottages with the doors open and fans running, you're looking at adding an at least additional 20 degrees. At least.
Easy.
Yeah. So, and with the doors closed, I mean, I can't even fathom.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I was there and the summers were so hot that we would go take showers, ice cold showers, and sometimes even get our shirts wet. So that we go sit in front of the fan and feel some kind of a breeze going on. Like it was just absolutely miserable. Like, you know, especially when you're on the top bunk, which has low ceilings that you can almost barely even sit up to, you know, like it is just, I mean, it's torture.
Well, and during COVID, you know, like we were really limited on when we could come out of our rooms. So like showers were another issue that it was the first 6 days, they weren't going to allow us shower. And for me, myself.
Shower the first 6 days?
No, I was on my cycle, you know, and I said, well, you're going to have to write me up. So the one time they let me out to go to the bathroom, I just took my shower step and I said, listen, you're literally going to have to write me up because I'm taking a shower. I'm taking a shower. And then when they didn't let us go to the bathroom, you know, like when women are on their cycle, every 2 hours, every 3 or 4 hours, that don't cut it sometimes. And I literally verbatim, Christina, my neighbor, she was on her cycle and the officer told her to go in the corner and wipe. I heard that with my own 2 ears. It was my next door neighbor.
Oh my gosh. Like this is just tearing me apart to hear. Like I can't imagine you guys not being able to shower and then being in your situation on your cycle and not being able to address that or take care of that. Or even worse, how humiliating is it to have to sit there and do it in front of your bunkie, right?
It was a female officer that told her this.
And that's
a female officer.
That's insane.
Oh, it was terrible.
You said that they weren't letting you use the phones and they took your tablets, which they had just given you tablets a couple years before, right? Like
the year before,
year before. And so now, which you keep at all times, correct? but now they've taken them.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so they didn't physically take our tablets on the big building, but I know that they did on the cottages during this time because I know people, and I was told that they physically took them. But we had ours, but we just couldn't use them.
so how long did you guys go without making any kind of phone calls or anything?
I think it was the first 5 or 6 days.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And just nobody's hearing from, or your family, nobody's hearing from them, like
No.
nobody knows what's going on. And true indeed, not everybody calls home every day, right?
Correct.
But there are some privileged people that have enough money to make those phone calls
Right.
consistently, and then all of a sudden just abruptly no phone calls, nothing.
Well, my family, my grandma in particular, if I don't call her every couple days just to even just check in and be like, hey, everything's okay.
Yeah.
She's worried. She knows something's going on. Like, she knows that if I'm in lock, something crazy happened, but I'm not in trouble. So if she knows that, like, she's not hearing from me, she actually called the governor's office, and the lady that spoke to her, who's over the Department of Corrections, was it it was the governor, yeah. And she said she has never been talked to so nasty in her entire life.
Wow. Well, and that was one of the things that we were encouraging people to do was to call up there. And
Yeah.
it's sad to hear that's how they responded to people, because
Yeah.
even if we want to say shame on you, Andrea, this is your grandmother that's calling out of concern, right? Like,
Right.
so to talk to her like that, can you justify that or excuse that in any way? I think not.
There's none.
There
There's
is,
none.
and so I just got it. I can't even imagine what it was like to be in there during COVID. And I've talked with a gentleman that was at Putnamville, and to see the difference in the way that it was ran at a men's facility versus at the women's facility, because I kept hearing that, because I know a little bit about the deputy warden and the major,
Mm-hmm.
and where they've come from, so on and so forth. Not anything personally, but that they did want to run it like a man's prison, but yet here you are treating the women far worse than what the men are even going through or how they even live. Like you are creating like it almost seemed to me like a vengeful environment, like
Yeah.
it blows my mind.
And,
Let's kind of move forward to, you were released what date?
August 5th.
August 5th. Okay, so what was it like at IWP when you left?
Things were starting to reopen. The last mile program and
All programming had been shut down, right?
this whole time. Yeah, no movement at all. Other than those people that could get out for their certain jobs.
Kitchen workers and commissary workers.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. So what would happen was they redid the GED program, and they sublet it to all these different classes for only 10 people per class. The last mile. So things started kind of opening up like that. They didn't go back to their normal way of reopening, what that would look like. So they did implement practices of social distancing, lowering the number of people per class. So they were trying to help maybe, now we have 6 GED classes that can hold 10 people each. So they were trying to kind of make that better, I think, but they didn't open all programs. And especially for my college, we were still doing it via correspondence through the program director. And we only had like 3 or 4 study halls before I even left because we weren't allowed to go. So, but things were kind of starting to reopen. You had to wear your mask. You had to wear your mask outside to the chow hall, outside of your cell, everywhere pretty much. And then rec, it went from only one side of your dorm to the entire dorm 12 gets to go outside from 1 to 2 o'clock on Wednesday. So like the rec schedule got totally revised and it's different. So, and then this is where they go back to saying, oh, well, it's COVID, we're social distancing, but really it's the major implementing strict lockdown practices regardless of COVID.
Right. We only have a couple minutes left. Is there anything else that we left out that you think is important to say or important for people to know?
Yep.
Or?
So I think that it's highly important. I've read the articles about your guys' campaign and when the DOC released statements. And I think I just want people to know that we get this perception of prison as we're growing up, either consciously or unconsciously. And we kind of have like a perception and an assumption. It's not how you think. And taxpayers are paying for people to be treated like this. And I think that people need to start asking questions. People need to know that this ideology behind what you think prison is and how it helps people and how wonderful it is, it's terrible. It's a lie. And when the DOC issued their statement stating that they let us have restroom breaks for every 30 minutes, and then their own staff member came back and said, that's a lie. That should be sending up alarms right there.
Right.
You know, these are things that we need to really look at as a society, and people that pay taxes and people that have loved ones or have had loved ones, or, you know, people just need to know that the DOC issues a statement and they're really good cover-ups. They have really good cover-ups. You know, this is their business. So of course they have to save their own. That doesn't mean it's the truth. That we should really be analytical and critical about thinking about these things, you know, according to prisons and how prisoners are treated.
I agree with you so much, because I know that the 2014 fire was never documented.
Never.
For one. And for two, when we were trying to get the fire marshal to make a surprise visit, coincidentally, all of the doors were unlocked and open until they left. And then they
were locked directly afterwards.
And they were closed and locked again. And I mean, just crazy. And I do agree with you, you know, that, you know, I look at you and you don't look like you've been to prison. You don't look like that you just got out of prison, you know, less than a month ago, you know?
Yeah.
And so I love to put a face to it, because you're smart and you're beautiful and you have potential out of this world. You've accomplished so much. And if you're such a horrible person that you need to be treated like this, then why were you the clerk over the baby's dorm for 2 years, right? Like, I mean, you can interact with babies, you can hold them, you can feed them, you can take care of them, you can do all this stuff, but yet you're this horrible person that should be locked into a cage and not even be allowed to use a restroom with any running water, no toilet, no conditioning, no way to cool down at all. And on the cottages, they were lucky if they were getting, they say, a cup of ice a day, which is actually a scoop of ice that doesn't even fill the cup halfway full. And those ice machines weren't even capable of keeping up with them. So, you know, it's really tragic to hear that you had to go through that, and that the women had to go through that, and they're still facing, you know, so much
serious challenges.
And I don't know, just chip it away one at a time, I guess. You know, it's a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
Andrea, you're so amazing, and thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I hope to have you as a guest again, because you have so much insight. I too did 7 years, and you see a lot during that time, you know.
You do.
You see a lot in there, you miss a lot out here, and I just think that
and a lot of things you see in there, you kind of get desensitized to exactly how much it's really not okay, but you're just living it, so you just assume that you have a more comfortability with it than we ever should, honestly.
Right. Which that is so true. This is going to cut us off any minute, but that's absolutely true. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I love that you bring that up, because it's not right. Like, we should not feel the way that we feel. We should not have some of the views that we've had, because they've embedded it into our brains that this is how it should be, right? Like,
right.
You do become desensitized to it. But I think that that's another valid point as to the difference between men and women, because women conform to that to avoid the conflict.
Yeah.
versus give the kickback that the men would. And I think it's not because women are weak by far, but because we truly do want to get back home to our children.
Yes.
We want to do and get everything that we can out of the experience that we have to go through, and we want to make the best of it as we can, and we don't want to have all these negative marks, or this negative attention drawn onto us. We're just trying to get home. Not saying that the men aren't. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just
Right.
saying that there's very different views of mentality from mothers, which is more than 80% of the incarcerated women,
Yes.
versus the men,
Yes. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come back anytime.
Awesome.
Anytime.
All right. Thanks, Andrea.
Bye, Christina.